Hello and welcome to Japanese Politics 101 with Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Squire, and me, your host, Maya Matsuoka. Today we're going to talk about 6 issues, and the room is going to be a little bit longer than usual. But the first thing which we're going to do is hear what Timothy has to tell us about change. So, Timothy, here we go.
Remember when we were in when the computers were first coming out and internet was being developed 20 years ago. There was something known as Moore's law, which said that technology increases geometrically, not mathematically, and it's a kind of a new phenomena for society to accommodate. So technology moves much faster than society can absorb it, and particularly with regard to government. Government, uh, companies and industry moves far faster. They're much more innovative than government. So government lags behind, and it's usually the technology and the innovations developed by industry that pull government forward. Sometimes in the past, Japan has been criticized as, having administrative guidance and guiding, selecting winners for the Japanese economy. And I think there was something to that. I think it's settled down quite a bit now. But the fact of the matter is that uh, government policy, not just the Japanese, it lags behind what technology is doing, and we see this increasingly in government because technology has actually expanded and grown so much further. So policymakers, people in government, are having a more and more difficult time um, keeping up and addressing that. And that's why you see, in my opinion, that's why you see these changes in government throughout the world happening at an increasing rate, that politics is not really as it used to be. The old boys and just stable, and the guys in the suits, they just stay in positions of power. Japan is very much like that, and I think we are on the cusp of seeing that fall away too, because technology is just increasing so fast. If you're watching fintech, the expansion of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, there's just so much going on at a structural level that hasn't really reached the everyday person, but is being developed to do that in a very big way. So, for example, the digital agency that was just launched, um, the amount of money and influence that is being poured into that will generate something that will be substantially uh, proliferated throughout Japanese society. What Japan does now will be substantially different than what it does in 5 years, supplemented and assisted by the standard norm that is generated by the Japanese government through the digital agency. But industry will even be farther um, uh, ahead of society and certainly government. So the policy challenges for the government are really pressing and big and huge, and sometimes they are not quick enough, and so people get frustrated with the current administration and they change hands. And you're seeing that in a lot of different ways. The change with Afghanistan just recently, we had this meeting, this briefing last week, and we did not talk about Afghanistan. It began to break on Sunday, and by Monday, the Taliban had taken over Kabul. So we've only had 1 week, and the dramatic changes that have occurred in that 1 week are representative of the pace and the kind of rapid change that I think that we are confronting in a lot of different areas, not just geopolitically, but also here in Japan and here in the region. So it is not wise to think that things will be status quo, because all of the indicators that we're talking about and the points that I'm highlighting today um, suggest that there is such a pent up frustration and inability to deal with the economy, with trade, with geopolitical forces, for the shipping lanes, for COVID, that something has to give. It can't continue this much longer. And so people are crying for a more dramatic leader, a more dramatic response, or let's show them who we are. That sort of a national desire to distinguish oneself from other countries and competitors. So we're confronting that at a very rapid rate. Anyway, I'd like to get into today's conversation. Hot off the list is Mr. Suga, what his standing is, who, once again, the competitors are, what it looks like between the election of the LDP president and the election of the 465 seats of the lower house. Which one comes first? So that's a pretty big deal. After I finish talking about that, I'm going to go into COVID, which also, this time last week, we were not in an extended state of emergency. That started on Monday. And just Friday, it was implemented for an extension and, for more prefectures to be encompassed in that. So that's a big deal. We should talk about that and why it's come to that. There's been a couple of reports recently talking about the Japanese economy and the impact on supply chain, somewhat caused by the COVID infection rates, but not completely. And so the Japanese Ministry of Economy is in a bit of a fight to shore up the way that trade is done, because Japan, being everybody knows a country that is founded on export trade and technology, is facing a lot of challenges. And then finally, I'd like to wrap up with some topics on defense, return back to Afghanistan and what's going on there, what's going on with the Japanese embassy and Japanese nationals, the trip of Vice President Kamala Harris to this region. And Motegi also is in the Middle East. He's the foreign minister. What's going on in Hong Kong, and just restrictive trade that is beginning to raise its head as a kind of way of tweaking China, and also China tweaking the United States in terms of dominance. So with that, let me get right into it. Please come up to the room if you think you might have something to say on any of these issues. And once again, thank you everybody for joining us today. Suga, he is in a bit of a bind. He's been in a bit of danger because he's had to extend the fourth state of emergency, which went into effect on Friday. Friday last week was important to us in Japan because not only was it the anniversary of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima 76 years ago, but it was also the anniversary of the end of the war. And so during that time, we have Obon, and people go visit their family graves. And also there is an annual trek to Yasukuni Shrine, which is the shrine for the war dead. And first of all, just on a personal note, I did Ohakamairi with my family over the weekend. Went to Shizuoka, and it was as if the entire town was locked down. There was really no place to eat. The city was all boarded up. Fujinomiya is not a tiny city; it's a substantial city, but there was nobody on the streets, and very, very little economic activity there. And I think that is being replicated throughout the country. So one of the beautiful things that we've all noticed about Japan is that when the governor says it, or when the prime minister says it, or when Governor Koike says it, people generally fall in line. There's been a little bit of exhaustion about that yet again, but people generally follow up, and that's been my experience when I was in Fujinomiya. Also, the visit to Yasukuni by several cabinet ministers, and also a lot of Diet members who go as a general rule, always causes concern with South Korea and China. The Prime Minister Suga, did not go. He sent his own offerings from his, of course, from his personal pocket. That was noted, but he didn't physically go there. So there are so many things that he needs to avoid and be careful of. I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but I think Yasukuni being the memorial for the war dead, that doesn't mean just in World War II. That just means people who gave their lives for the country are entombed there. I think it's not something that, the unfortunate thing is that some war criminals are interned there, but I don't think it's something that should not be honored. Everybody has their own opinion, but it is something that happens every year at this point in time, and so it's something to keep an eye on. Mr. Suga is very reluctant to test any waters. So his approval rating in a poll that was done just last week shows him at about 30%, 31% approval rating. There's almost a layer, a 30% approval margin, that if you fall below it, people just say, you can't hold on to that seat. And he's testing that. The last time that number was tested was with Mr. Abe when he was in office. I think it was in 2017, and he was at 34%. Mr. Suga is below that mark, and his election campaign is coming up. They must elect a president of the LDP because the presidency term is over, and thus the LDP, the prime minister's position is up for grabs. So the big focus of attention right now is, do we hold the president's election before we hold the election of the members of the lower house, or we do it the other way around? Do we have the election of the 465 seats, and then based on the results there, we have an election for the prime minister? Because under the first theory, we elect the prime minister, and then we have the election of the lower house. That means that we did a really good job in electing the prime minister, and everybody's behind him, and you endorse him by voting for people in his party. The flip side of that is that let's hold the election for the members of the parliament, and based on that, if the LDP does well, I guess it's an endorsement of the prime minister. So the one who carried us here, he should receive that seat as kind of a reward. The coalition of the LDP and Komeito hold about 305 seats of the lower house, and that is about 65%, just a tad under two-thirds. Two-thirds would be 66%. So they're at 65% now. Mr. Abe, as you might remember, was adamant on getting two-thirds in the lower house, two-thirds in the upper house, so that he could push through the referendum to change the Constitution, revise Article 9, and then move forward with having a more dominant military to project Japan's intentions and defensive capabilities throughout the region. He wasn't able to do that, and this next election looks by all standards to be one where the LDP loses seats. So how many seats they lose will be attributed to, obviously, to Mr. Suga. But if it's a big loss, then definitely he's gone. And if it's a light loss, maybe he has a chance. On the other hand, if he has the election of prime minister first, that calculus is not there. The calculus would be, did he do a good job on the Olympics? Is COVID coming around? Is he projecting, leadership to the population of Japan and among the LDP members? That's the fight that's going on right now. That decision will be made on the 26th. That's in 4 days. Today's the 22nd. In 4 days, that decision will be made by the LDP commission on deciding what the LDP rules will be and when that timing will be. Nobody has thrown their hat into the ring yet, although a couple of people have said, yeah, I think I'll do it. There have been 2 females who have come up and said, I think I would like to be prime minister. Nobody's thrown their hat into the ring, and probably they won't do that until the report from the campaign commission reports. The prime minister could ignore that, but probably won't. He could ignore it if they say the LDP president is first and then the lower house election, because the LDP president or the prime minister has the ability to close down the house at any time. It's not completely a unilateral power. He could do that if he doesn't like what they've decided. Unlikely. So we can anticipate that currently the election for the lower house will not occur before the LDP president. And that's for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that the Paralympics stop on September 12th. And the first date where the election could occur for LDP is the 17th. So there's only 3 or 4 days in between the time where Mr. Suga can make that kind of decision. And I think he will just rely on the LDP to tell him that he goes first and the House election goes second. So if he's not looking very, very strong, the way to bolster his appeal is by coalition building. And his coalition building is based on his relationship with Mr. Nikai, who is the Secretary General of the LDP. Opposed to that is Mr. Abe and Mr. Aso. Probably Mr. Aso trumps Nikai in terms of political weight and power. He's been in the Diet longer. He is the Minister of Finance. So throughout his time, I mean, he's the longest serving Minister of Finance. Throughout that time, you're just collecting favors. You're doing stuff. You're allotting budget to people who maybe don't deserve it, who come in on bended knee, and you allow them to have their budget. He's got vast resources throughout politics and industry. Mr. Nikai, on the other hand, is Secretary General of the LDP, so he has a considerable power at the LDP level in getting people elected and making sure that they have the campaign funds and that sort of thing. And since the election of the LDP president is an internal matter with the LDP, probably Mr. Nikai wields a little bit more power there. But the coalition with Mr. Abe, former Prime Minister Abe, and Abe against Nikai is very strong. So a lot just depends on what happens between now and then. And one of the most important bellwethers of that is happening today in Yokohama. Yokohama is having a mayoral election every 4 years. The current incumbent, Ms. Fumio Hayashi, is up for re-election. She's been elected 4 times. She's been there for a long time. She wants to run again. The LDP doesn't want her to run again, so they put in a member of the cabinet, or maybe he came by himself. It was his own volition to run against her. So that fight will be decided today. There's no campaigning today. It's just a voting day. It's a nice day outside, so the percentage of registered voters compared to who actually votes is likely to be high. The main campaign issue is the integrated resorts issue. Ms. Hayashi is relatively for the integrated resorts, and Okonogi, an LDP longtime politician, is against it. He's an interesting guy. When Mr. Suga first got started, he was the diet secretary for Okonogi's dad, and he got his start there. So he did pretty well. The current incumbent was his son, who was a diet secretary for Mr. Suga, and he launched out. So he owes a lot to Mr. Suga, but he's not voting for the integrated resorts, even though Mr. Suga is staunchly behind integrated resorts. So there's a lot of horse trading even at that level, at the mayoral election. But pundits say if Yokohama goes to Hayashi again, it's a slap in the face to all of the work and prestige that Suga has invested in Yokohama. I mean, his election district is Yokohama as well. And it is said that if Okanogi does not win today, then that's it for the prime minister. Other people who are in the LDP who are looking at their inevitable election between now and November 17th, they're just going to say, I'm on a dead horse, so I need to change horses. And so the voices for him to step down will become a crescendo. And you're already hearing that now if you're following the press. There is a lot of rumblings about his handling and the administration of COVID and the vaccines. So there is a lot to be anticipated then. As I said earlier, on the 26th, the commission will report when the presidential elections will be. Nobody has thrown in their hats, although Kono Taro has already said, I'm going to publish a manifesto about what my administration would look like. That will be circulated on the 27th. So you know where he's going. Mr. Kishida has been very quiet. Mr. Kishida, as you remember, his partner in his faction is Hayashi Yoshimasa, who is a upper house member, or I should say a lower house member. I predicted last week that he would resign. I think he resigned on Monday from the upper house. So that is a clear signal, even though he hasn't thrown his hat into the ring. That is a clear signal that he is going to, well, number one, run in the lower house when it is closed. So he's got a hiatus now. He's not an upper house member. So all of this time he can be campaigning for his election and potentially be in line. He already ran once for prime minister, for being in line again. There are a lot of other people who are throwing their hats in. Let me just toss this out there before I close this component up of the briefing. So interestingly enough, Sanae Takeuchi said that she would like to be prime minister. She thinks she has something to offer. That was done last week. Noda Seiko announced it a little bit before last week, so I announced that last week in this room. She is, interestingly enough, the Deputy Secretary General, so she reports to Nikai. So she's decided to throw her hat in. You've got to imagine that she couldn't have done that without his endorsement. And it looks like the Secretary General Nikai is going to endorse Mr. Suga. So there's a little bit of scratching of heads going on there. If Mr. Suga has an agreement with the Secretary General that if he becomes Prime Minister, then you can stay Secretary General. Mr. Abe and Mr. Aso don't want the Secretary General in that position. They want to put somebody else in. So they've got to horse trade with Mr. Suga too. Mr. Suga has got a difficult decision to make. Do I, screw the person who put me in this position, Mr. Nikai, 10 months ago, or do I go with, Mr. Abe and Aso and, throw Mr. Nikai under the bus? That will generate repercussions. They'll both generate repercussions. So that is to be seen. Kono Taro is also likely to throw his hat in. Motegi, who is currently the foreign minister, there's some question about whether he would do that, or Mr. Amari, who also might do that. He's in the Policy Research Council. I think Amari would probably is poised to become the replacement for the Mr. Nikai. Shigeru Ishiba, who is always wanting to be prime minister, has been a candidate the last 4 times. He might give it his last hurrah. And Hakabun Shimomura, who is with the Hosoda faction. So there are about 6 or 7 that are potential. any candidate must have 20 Diet members endorse them. That doesn't sound like a lot, but endorsing a candidate kind of signals your attachment to them. And if you're in a faction, you must vote along faction lines. And if the faction has decided that the person that you like is not the one that they want, and you vote for them, you could be kicked out of that faction, and that wouldn't be very good. And then if they get 20 signatures and don't become prime minister, then they're out in the cold. And if they vote with them and they don't get 20 signatures, then they're out in the cold too. So it's not a very politically astute move. So it doesn't look like Sanai Takaichi or Seiko Noda. She didn't get 20 signatures the last time she tried this, but it's a complicated mix right now. And as we see in Yokohama, there are 8 contenders for the mayor. The toss-up is basically between the first 2, Okanogi and Hayashi. And the other 6 are kind of not really real contenders. But what happens is when you have so many people running, it does create the possibility of a dark horse coming up because they've split the vote so effectively. The same thing could be done for the prime minister's race as well, because you've got almost 7 people that have expressed an interest. So we'll see how that runs. I do apologize for talking too much about Mr. Suga's situation, but I think it's important to get into the details so that you can predict yourself what's going on, and also you can see, who the players are and what that kind of jostling that is going on right now. And by the way, Mr. Motegi, who hasn't thrown his hat into the ring, but similar to Kamala Harris, when the situation gets hot domestically, the best thing to do is step out internationally. So he is in the Middle East on a 10-day tour. He's kind of out of the picture. It brandishes his image as this is supposed to do for Kamala Harris, and also get them out of the limelight where there's just a lot of embarrassment. So he will be back in 4 days visiting the Middle East, interestingly enough. But anyway, let me wrap that up, open the room up for questions and answers or discussion, and then move on to the COVID situation. Sorry, I've been going on for about 25 minutes.
I was wondering about Mr. Kishida. So they say that he's going to wait until August the 26th to decide whether he's going to, stand for the presidential election or not. So I wonder why that is, and what are his motives for waiting and being so undecided yet.
Okay, so part of it is just this anticipation that I think people hold. He actually scores well among LDP rank younger file Diet members. So he's not somebody to snide at as a possible contender. But he's got Mr. Hayashi in his faction, who is a very popular potential candidate as well. I think probably this will be Kishida's chance to become prime minister. And on the 26th, everybody's going to throw their hat in. So once that date comes out, so they will decide it will be the presidential election. It will happen in the second week of November, and campaign will start the last week of October. So it's basically a 10-day campaign period. So they'll announce the campaign start date and the election date. So the prime minister needs to be in place on September 30th, actually. That's when the prime minister's term ends. They could decide to extend his period because they want to have the election of the lower house first. So playing that game, Mr. Kishida and everybody else is wondering, is it going to be the prime minister first or the election of the House members first? That is a huge deal. So it dictates what they're going to do. I predict, and I think everybody else kind of is along this thinking, that it'll be the race for the prime minister first, and then the election of the lower house second. And this will happen in pretty quick succession. We'll have a new prime minister, certainly by this time next month, more likely around the first or second week of October. And then within weeks, we'll have the lower house election. And so that's why he's biding his time and wondering which way to jump, when to throw his hat in. So maximum impact is I think the answer there.
Thank you for that. And then there is one more thing which just came to me now. Sorry, we have been talking about LDP members, and we have been talking about the prime minister and also the presidential election of LDP. But we know that in the general election, basically, we can expect that other parties, which are now in opposition, they may gain power, more influence at the presidential election, the general election. And so we have a kind of, we have talked mostly about LDP, but what will happen, if...
Great question.
Yeah, if they actually gain, more power than LDP at that point, because this is certainly a possibility, right? I mean, with all the things going on, I mean, with the slow vaccine rollout, with, the Olympic Games, with the Delta variant just spreading so fast, it seems that the population is really not very happy with what the current cabinet and Mr. Suga have been doing. So we don't know how it will play out, but it's really interesting to watch that.
Okay, let me address that because it's an interesting question. The LDP president is chosen by sitting LDP members and by people who are members of the LDP. So the weighted average is the LDP members get a heavier say, but people who belong to the LDP, the rank and file members, also have a say. The LDP holds more than 51% of the seats in the lower house. With the Komeito party, they hold 65%. And that's kind of one of the reasons why there is this coalition, that by themselves they hold about 50%, a little bit more than 50%, but with the Komeito they hold almost 2/3, and the drive is, let's get past 2/3, and they haven't been able to achieve that yet. They've achieved that in the upper house, but not in the lower house. It is almost unfathomable that the LDP and the Komeito will lose more than seats that will allow them to elect the prime minister. So even if they have the election for the lower house first and the LDP loses, it's not going to lose so much that by a block, they're not going to be able to elect the prime minister, because the prime minister is selected by the lower house. And there are too many other political parties that they probably, even if the LDP fell below 50%, and even if Komeito decided that they weren't going to vote for their coalition partner, they're going to make a coalition with somebody else. You've got the communists, you've got everything else. You've got 6 other political parties. For them to come together and vote for their prime minister, it's very unlikely, very unlikely. So the LDP will still hold the reins of power for the prime minister, by all accounts. A lot of people think it's a democratic election. It's not. It's a parliamentary process. So the prime minister, it's a popularity vote among the people within the parliament. Frank, thank you.
Hi, Martin. Hi. Thanks again for this. This is fascinating. Every Sunday morning I can wake up and listen to you. I do. A quick question. Putting aside all of the complexities and the maneuverings and everything, who do you think would be the best prime minister to lead Japan now, with all the challenges ahead of Japan?
Yeah, I like Motegi, I like Amari, I like Kono. Yeah, those are the 3 that I really like. I think they're extremely competent. Nobody's got the full Monty. But yeah, I think if I had to call it, I would say Konotaro, and I think maybe 33% of the people who have been polled also agree with that. So 33% is not 50%, but 33% split over maybe four candidates ultimately is enough to win that game.
Thanks.
The thing, if I can just elaborate just a tiny bit, it's not so much about personality, it's about politics. That's why we talk about it so much, because it's about coalitions, it's about horse trading, it's about who's on top today, and it's about when the election's going to be and how we can push this thing back. And will there be more inoculations than today if we wait, 3 weeks or 2 weeks? So all of these calculations go into it's politics. That's why this is a room on Japanese politics.
Yeah, and that's like my question is really deliberately, who do you think is the best person? Putting aside all of that, because it is so complicated, isn't there? So many
Right.
factors, but who do you think would be the best person for Japan? And you say Kono.
Okay, well, there are a couple of people that we haven't talked about, and so I haven't thrown that into my calculation. That is um, uh, Mr. Abe, who could come back and run again, and I think that would be dynamic and dramatic. It would raise other issues, but I think having been a prime minister for so long, I think he would be an excellent prime minister. He's got some scores to settle. It would be an interesting administration, but I think he would do an excellent job. And then Koike is the other one. She is favored by Nikai, and the reason why Nikai wants the election of the lower house before the election of prime minister, if you're following me, Nikai wants the election of the lower house before the election of prime minister. That's opposed to what everybody else is saying. And the reason why is because he wants to have Miss Koike run as a lower house member, which she will obviously win, and she'll win big. And then when it comes time to have the presidential election, there will be so much confusion that she would come in as a dark horse. And that's somebody that we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about that possibility coming up. I give it very low numbers, but there are enough people talking about it. And it is important enough to Mr. Nikai that it is not something to just toss away. Similarly with Mr. Abe, his investigation has been reopened. To me, that would give me encouragement to run again so that I can go back and kick the public prosecutor in the teeth and get somebody else in there as prime minister. But that's just me.
I invited Aya and Tilo. So good morning, both of you. Aya.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome.
Good morning,
Good
Timothy
morning.
and
Nice to
Maya.
see
Nice to see you too. Okay, like you said, Mr. Kono would be the best. Not best, maybe your choice. Mine too. I always wish that Mr. Kono would be the next prime minister, because he doesn't care what other people think. He just say it out loud what's on his mind, and also he speaks English well. And my question is for Timothy is that why do you think Mr. Kono is the fit for the next prime minister?
Well, besides the fact that we're both classmates, and I've known him his father. I've actually knew his father before I met him for many years. So a lot of this is all driven by personality. So it's not, it's who you know in Japanese politics. And because of who you know, I'm able to, create a business because I've been doing this for so long, and it's all about personalities. So part of it is colored by that, and a lot of times, but I actually think, yeah, Motegi and Amari and Konotaro bring something fresh to the scene, and I think Japan needs that, like you were saying, Aya.
Thank you, Timothy.
That how a prime minister acts internally and externally. How he is viewed from people in the country and out of the country are two very different things. And Mr. Abe, he actually projected the image of a strong leader. And well, basically, while he was in office, well, Japan was perceived as a very valuable player in the Indo-Pacific region. And
Reliable.
reliable,
Yeah.
yes. And so that's also a very important thing which we need to consider. Of course, his policies, well, in the country, especially once the pandemic, started, were not so not so highly valued. But yeah, I think that in cases of, I mean, I'm not trying, to defend his policies or whatever, but just one thing that I want to say is that we need to be fair and say that in crises like this, there is no government which, there has been no government which has done the right thing all the time. And we need to appreciate that fact too. But of course, there have been a lot of scandals, there have been a lot of glitches, and
Yeah.
yes, so there are a lot of things, which, and there is no guarantee also, that the new prime minister who comes next will do all the things right. So it's really something which, of course, we always hope that we will have a great prime minister. The next person who stands there will be great and it will be reliable and so on, but there is no guarantee for that. Yeah.
That's
Well,
true.
it's never the case where it's not important, vitally important. And I think when we're always in this situation, we always say, but it's more important now. I don't think that's accurate. It's like saying, we have to stay with Suga because there's really nobody really viable who is a good contender. They always say that, and it's never true. And it's never true that it's more important now. It's always important. But geopolitically, I think we've got a lot of very pressing external threats that require somebody who is going to take that role and really do superbly with it, not half-assed, not kind of mediocre. I think we need somebody who is really, really good, and that's why I like those three candidates.
Yes, agreed. Well, thank you. And Thilo, good morning. Thank you for coming up on stage. Are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, thanks. I'm a little bit late on stage here. Thanks, Timothy, for the
We're taking notes of
briefing.
that in the time that you signed on, so don't worry
Okay.
about that. We're going to keep a record.
Well, first of all, thanks, Timothy, for the detailed briefing. I've been on the phone in between, so I may have missed part of the answer, but I wanted to rephrase Frank's question. Regardless of your preferences, who of the LDP candidates eligible for prime minister would you think would make the most drastic changes in future in regards to domestic policy, the COVID situation, and foreign policy, especially with the Taiwan situation? Again, regardless of your preferences, what would you?
That's difficult to say because everybody couches everything. They keep everything internal. They really don't say very much about what they would do. Kono Taro, on the other hand, just as Aya was saying, he is outspoken. He says what's on his mind. He does, he doesn't like nuclear. He says, I don't like nuclear. People are saying, well, you shut up about that. You're not going to get elected because the nuclear lobby is so strong here. So don't say that. Don't talk about, these engines of the economy. You're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. He doesn't quite follow that mold, but most people just hold things inside. It's just like Mr. Kishida. He hasn't said what he's going to do. He hasn't thrown his hat in. Is it going to be him? Is it going to be his partner, Hayashi? What is he going to do? So part of that is the anticipation, and part of that is, I don't know. Shogunai. We leave it to the winds. We select the person that is the most handsome, or we select the person who people told us we should select, which is more often the case. So, gosh, I belong to the LDP, and my member that I vote for the last 3 times, he is in the Hosoda faction. So whatever he says, I'm going to do. That generally follows lockstep method here. So who knows? I think of those three. I think any of those three would do a really superlative job. Amari is and also Amari and Motegi are both fluent English speakers. Obviously, Kono Taro, his English is by far the best. So I mean, English speaking skill is one very small component. And just because you speak English is not actually highly valued by the vast majority of voters. So I don't know how much weight that carries, but it is great if you're on the international scene and you're slapping backs with people and you're not falling down sand traps, and you're looking cool. I think, any one of those three would do a superlative job. And I think a superlative job is what's called for.
It's just one thing which is, I'm absolutely sure that Kono Taro will do a great job if he's elected prime minister. But at the same time, just as you say, that he is very outspoken person, and sometimes he seems to be a little bit of what's that?
Arrogant?
Oh no, I don't mean arrogant. The word doesn't come up again. Oh, sorry, but just. Things happen a kind of unexpected with him sometimes, and
Yeah,
he speaks up with at least that's the way it looks like, that without coordinating his ideas and policies with the other members of the party. And I guess that's one of the reasons why he is not so popular within the party as a candidate. So, and I just wonder, if he is elected as prime minister, whether that will actually damage, his, let's say, being in office and his influence and his standing as the prime minister.
Yeah.
Because we can see
Well,
such things happening to Mr. Suga now. He doesn't coordinate some of the things he says, with the party, and he gets punished. So just I wonder whether, it's, or I think that, it's certainly a possibility with Kono Taro.
So I think, one of the things that you see in the United States, we have a new president who won by a controversial, but by a large margin of the votes that were collected and counted. And so as a consequence, even in light of the maybe 90-day or 3-4 month honeymoon, people gave him a lot of room to carve the path for the new administration. So he was writing executive orders, he was designing the budget, he was doing a lot of things. But all you need is a couple of things to happen to go wrong, and all of a sudden, all of your supporters, it's like they're parachuting away from you. And similarly, you can see that happening in Japanese politics too. So I think somebody like Kono Taro will have that honeymoon period, and there'll be some challenges. And as long as he's able to effect change and keep the people who voted for him relatively happy, he'll be able to hold on. What we don't want is, this flip-flopping of prime ministers, which is something that, Mr. Suga is, if Mr. Suga changes, it indicates that there was Abe for a long period of time, the longest serving prime minister, and then a 1-year term. And now are we going to go back to 1-year terms, 2-year terms? I think the better scenario is keeping a prime minister and keeping him for the required 3 or 4 years that he can stay in office before going up for an election again. So, politics is a full contact sport, and a lot of times you can be doing the right thing, but you've got people who are detracting you, and you've got the opposition party, and sometimes you make decisions that are just the right decision, but they're unpopular, and you tumble into a bit of a morass.
Right. So we have now one question now, and which is, So, Timothy, how do you expect government Koike to play in the upcoming snap election? So this,
Okay.
yes. So
Yes.
if
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think that was from yes,
Hiroaki-san,
a
yes, a
colleague.
colleague. Yeah.
Yes. Um, so first of all, a snap election. I hope everybody understands what that term is. A snap election is an election that's been called by the prime minister, immediately closing down the House and therefore calling for an election. So the question is, how do you think Ms. Koike will do if there is a snap election? So the likelihood of there being a snap election is very low at this point. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen after the Paralympics, which is on September 12th, and before the date that the LDP Commission on the election holds it identifies the date of the LDP party president. So what the prime minister might do is, assuming the commission recommends the LDP president election is first, he might say, "Hell no, I'm going to call a snap election." That's what a snap election is. Okay, it happens quite frequently in Japanese politics. It is very rare for the members of the lower house to serve out their entire term and then go for an election. This is maybe two times in post-war history has it happened like this. So it is quite rare, and it's indicative of a lot of things. It's indicative of a lot of things that are not essentially good. And the question is, if there was a snap election, how do you think Ms. Koike would do? And it doesn't require a snap election. It doesn't require the regular election as advised by the LDP Council or approved by the Diet. Ms. Koike will do fabulously. She will run from a lower house seat in Tokyo, and I think Tokyo has 9 House of Representative seats. She could, I guess she would choose the one where she has a residence, and she would win fabulously. So among the people in her election district, so there, of all the election districts, it's supposed to be proportional representation, and it is not the Constitution. It has been unconstitutional for about 12 years. They're still trying to address that, but it's supposed to be somewhat comparable, that the person elected from a district in Tokyo has the same number of constituents as the member in Hokkaido. It doesn't quite work out that way, but depending on how the highest proportion of, it's not just proportion, it's also actually voters. So sometimes you win because there was a low turnout and you won the 44%, and therefore you became the winner because there were 3 other candidates, for example. But it also depends on how many people actually turned out to vote for you, and that is recorded. That's in the Binlan. It's a way of authorizing, cabinet positions and different seats within the LDP or within any of the political parties. So the number of votes you get, it's like cash in your pocket. So she will do extremely well. And based on that, Mr. Nikai is likely to say, since she received, the highest number of votes of all of the people that voted throughout Tokyo or throughout Japan, the 465 members, look at the number that she got. She obviously, the people love her. Let's promote her as prime minister. I think that's the way it goes. And I think even if that's not quite accurate, it does indicate that she will do extremely well in a snap election or in a regular standard election. I hope that responds to the question.
Thank you for that.
With that, let's go on to the next big issue. We talked about COVID. We talked about Mr. Suga for about 25 minutes and another, 20 minutes of question and answer. So I appreciate that. Let's move on to COVID. So last week, I keep telling you guys this, and I know everybody that's a regular on the room knows, things change so quickly, so dramatically every week, from week to week. A week ago today, we weren't in an extended state of emergency. It didn't include 13 prefectures. We weren't essentially in a lockdown. As I started my conversation at the beginning of the room, that I was in Shizuoka, and in a relatively small municipality of Fujinomiya, and the entire town is boarded up. I mean, the restaurants are closed, nobody's out, and so lots of things happen every week, and each week. Maybe it's just me, but each week this room becomes more and more important. And maybe that's only because we're leading up to the election of prime minister and the election of the lower house. But I sense that this thing that we're on, this ride that we're on, is becoming bigger and more important, and more critical events are happening. Afghanistan, the effect of Afghanistan on geopolitics in this region will be enormous, and can't be really predicted or kind of encapsulated yet. I mean, it's happening right now. Similarly with COVID, this time last week, we knew about the Delta variant, and that it was hitting the younger kids more than it was hitting the old people. We have so many people, more than 50% of the population has now been vaccinated. The numbers are astounding. That the Japanese have really come up. They're increasingly testing for the COVID variant. The number of people who have been unvaccinated is less than the people who have been vaccinated, and the push continues. The problem is that they just, I don't know if it's accurate to say they were too hopeful or too lackadaisical, or maybe they were focused too much on the Olympics. So the reports out are that the Olympics did not create this situation that we're in right now. It didn't bring in more of the variants. It didn't bring in more sickness into Japan, but I think it caused a diversion of attention. So you might remember when this first started before the Olympics, and they got really excited. Konotaro was assigned by the prime minister, please get these people vaccinated, whatever you do. And he enlisted the self-defense forces, and they set up a couple of inoculation centers. That was huge. And then they came up and they allowed corporations and industries, universities to inoculate. The other thing that they were talking about, you might recall, was at the same time things were going really wild in New York and throughout the United States. They had these like huge tents where they would have inoculation centers, or they would create hospital beds. You remember that? So the Japanese started thinking, in anticipation of this thing getting out of control, maybe we need to have more hospital beds. We need to think about these kind of temporary facilities that we can handle that. And that discussion only lasted for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then it kind of fell off the map. And I think what happened was people stopped talking about it because it became too difficult. We didn't know what we were going to do, where we were going to put the people, how were we going to house them, where were we going to get the nurses, and that sort of thing. Now that decision to kind of push that aside and focus on other things, for example, the Olympics, is now coming back to bite Japan in the butt. And the reason for that is because now with this new variant that we didn't anticipate back then, and we thought maybe it's better to inoculate people first. So inoculations work for the people who are catching COVID now, and there are a lot of them, and 90% of them are with the new variant. Less than 4% of those are from people who have been inoculated. So the people who are inoculated are not catching it. It's the ones that are not inoculated. And the reason for that is because the Japanese government focused on the 60-year and older and getting most of them inoculated because those were the most at risk. And then the variant came in, and it turns out that it was the younger people. And actually today, it is the 30s and 40 years old who are the most at risk. And they're catching it faster than anybody else. So in June of, just to put it in perspective, in June of this year, there were 1,300 cases in Tokyo. A month later, on July 21st, there were 5,000 cases, and today there are 20,000 cases. This is just astounding. Nishimura, the minister of health and welfare, has identified this as a disaster. This is a disaster, he said, for Japan. And that word is not used very frequently. So you've got to take note of the use of it with the extension from 6 to 13 prefectures. And the lockdown, it's not called a lockdown, but essentially the lockdown is really stiff, and it's not enough for Mr. Omi. So there's a controversy going on with the prime minister and the fellow who is somewhat similar to Fauci in the United States. It needs to be harder. It needs to be more stiff. You need to have penalties. And the prime minister, who is looking at election, doesn't want that. He wants it to go easier, and he wants to have the resolution to the issue by inoculations or by having more beds. The problem with the beds is that if you're following the news, you probably heard about the young lady in Chiba who was pregnant, and she felt like she had COVID, so she got tested. She did have COVID, and the instructions from the family services was, please isolate at home because we don't have a place to put you. She started going through labor, and she couldn't get anybody to come in to pick her up. Nobody wanted to handle somebody that was pregnant who had COVID. She gave birth at home, and then they picked her up in the ambulance, and the baby unfortunately died. 1,000, just this last week, 1,000 people who called the hospital for paramedics or the ambulance were turned away. Currently, 1,600 are self-isolating. That means they have COVID. They've been tested for it, but they've been told to self-isolate at home. The Japanese government, so you remember Appa Hotels. Appa Hotels is very famous. It's all over. The CEO is very flamboyant lady who lives in, where does she live? Over in Hiro, fabulous mansion. She built a lot of hotels in anticipation of the Olympics, and she gambled and didn't win. And she has been enlisted by the government to have her hotels, many of her hotels, as self-isolating centers. So the Japanese government has set up so many rooms for people to do that. In fact, they have 6,200 rooms that are available, many of them Appa hotels, here in Tokyo. Unfortunately, only half of those are operational, even though they're kind of reserved. And the reason why only half of them are operational is because they don't have staff or nurses to handle 4 or 5 or 6 rooms for people who are self-inoculated. So as it stands right now, even though there are 6,000 plus rooms available, only 1,700 are occupied. And people are told by the government, when you call up and you say, listen, I lost my sense of smell and taste. I'm not feeling very good. I'm afraid I might have caught it. They're told to isolate at home. One of the reasons for doing that is because the Delta variant is suspected of being less deadly than the regular COVID, even though it's more contagious. So it's spreading very rapidly. But the people who are calling, they're not getting the attention and the care. The beds are full up. The ambulances can't pick up people. There were reports just this last week that of the maybe 2,000 people that called in and said, I need help. I'm self-isolating, but I'm getting bad. About half of those were picked up by ambulances and diverted. It took 2 or 3 times to get them into a hotel. And 52 of them, it took 5 hours or more. This is in Tokyo, to finally find a place to take care of them. So the fact that this is being termed a disaster by one of the ministers of, it's bad news for Mr. Suga, but it's bad news for the Japanese population and the economy. I mean, the 13 prefectures that have now gone under the state of emergency, represent 84% of the entire population of Japan. So remember when I started this part about COVID, I talked a little bit about rapid change. And when I started this room, we talked about, things technology growing geometrically, whereas many other things only grow mathematically by mathematical expansion. These kinds of things that we're confronting now here with COVID are really beginning to get somewhat out of control. So when we meet next week, I think you're going to hear something similar to what we've talked about this week, that change is upon us. Things are happening at an alarming rate. You need to be prepared for that. You need to be anticipating these other things that are going to be happening to the economy, to the medical industry, to working from home, for a lot of different things. So I try not to be alarming about it, and I try not to interject too much of my own political bent, but things are happening at an increasingly rapid rate, and I think COVID is about to take over and dominate a lot of our conversation. So, for example, it could be that the council announces that we're not going to have the presidential election first. We're going to have the election of the lower house first. They could come to that conclusion. And then they could say, because of COVID, we don't want people out voting. We don't want them going to the voting centers and that sort of thing. Let's push it back. So this whole thing, the lockstep, just is all pushed back 2 or 3 months. That is a possibility. Even if they have the election for prime minister first, and we have a new prime minister, or maybe the same prime minister, and it's time for us to elect the lower house, the fact that COVID is still out of control could impact that situation too. So there's a lot to talk about, and I appreciate, again, everybody joining in on this room. There will always be something interesting and engaging to talk about. With that, I'd like to close this component so that we don't go over time.
Thank you for that. It looks like rather than lack of beds, there is a lack of medical staff who can deal, who
Right.
can treat patients.
So part of that complication, forgive me for interjecting, Maya, part of that complication is that under Japanese law, you have to be a medical professional to inject somebody with a needle. So a lot of these people who could be working on COVID patients, they're doing the better job of just putting needles in people's arms, whereas they have far better utility doing other things. But if I'm a nurse, that's what I would rather do if I'm getting the same amount of pay, rather than working in a hotel dealing with a whole floor of people who have COVID.
Right. Yes. So this is obviously a problem which cannot be decided or cannot be solved at the moment, because you just cannot, import medical staff from another country to deal with this crisis. So the question is how, or what policies can be implemented, in fact, to deal with the crisis. And
so sorry, just to interject right there before you take a breath. We tried that. We tried importing medical staff from the Philippines, and that was about 5 years ago under the Abe administration. It was miserable. It didn't go very well, and even though they went through language training, the Japanese people who were in the hospitals, not with COVID, this was without COVID, but there was already a shortage of medical staff and taking care of people who are, geriatrics and relegated to bed care and that sort of thing. It just didn't work. So we've tried that in a more favorable environment. It just didn't work.
Indeed, it didn't, and it's not going to work now, because every country is actually struggling for medical staff. It's not only Japan, it's everywhere else it is happening. But I was thinking, because there are calls from prefectural governors to actually implement stricter state of emergencies. Now, later maybe as well, and they're calling actually for constitutional changes. So I wonder whether this is down the path, because of course a lot of people are opposed to those. A lot of people support them too. So I can see a very clear divide between the public opinion as well. But Yes, we'll see what happens, of course. I don't know whether you have any information about that too.
So, yeah, the constitutional change, we need to change the constitution to give more power to the central government. The idea of distributing more power to take care of the COVID. So when you go into a state of emergency, that allows the governors to do certain things that they couldn't have done otherwise. It still gives the central government enormous influence and power, but it also distributes some of that to the governors. So on an even plane, the governors like it because they have more ability. They don't have to kowtow as much to the central government. They can impose fines and close down businesses and that sort of thing. But for Mr. Omi, who is the Fauci kind of lookalike here, he says it's just not enough. There needs to be very stringent fines. The government needs to come down and physically lock it down. I mean, look at Australia. Australia is people have characterized it as a prison state. I mean, they are really having a difficult time. I don't know if that's in the cards for Japan, but sometimes the Japanese government doesn't need to do that. It just says, people, please, we apologize for this imposition, but please, stop, having any economic activity, stay home, take care of your parents, and people typically do that. But yeah, the intensity of this demand by the medical profession and also the governors for more power creates a certain tension. And if you're in Mr. Suga's shoes, the only thing you're focused on is I want to become prime minister again. And that depends on inoculations, that depends on the COVID response, that depends on the Olympics and the Paralympics. So that's pretty much what he's focused on.
Well, and we have Ted Gover. Ted, good morning, or it's good evening for you.
Good evening, Ted. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Just a quick question. Is vaccine hesitancy a problem in
Yes.
Japan? And if it is. Okay. What's Suga and his administration doing about that?
So the vaccine hesitancy, this might strike you as somewhat counterintuitive, but there is a pocket of conspiratorial thought here in Japan. You would think, it's the white supremacists, it's the tinfoil hatters, it's all coming from the United States, but I think it's all over the world. There's this I don't want to say fringe group because that sounds pejorative. There is a reason why people think about these things that are dismissed because the CIA created this word to just diminish everything by calling it a conspiracy theory. That is actual fact. That word was created by the CIA to diminish the voices of people who have come up with some articulation of what really are the facts. So it really attracts a certain kind of individual. And it also becomes more and more popular when people have lost faith in the central government or in those typical bastions of faith and credibility. For example, the press. The press in the United States is hugely called into question. So the conspiracy theories fill in that gap. Similarly, here in Japan, there is a lot of discord and dissatisfaction with what's going on, and why in the hell does Japan have to dance to somebody else's tune? I mean, we would never allow an FDA non-approved drug to come into Japan and be inoculated. I mean, our bodies are different. Our stomachs are different. Our snow is different. So why would we allow there must be something else going on. So that sense is very strong here. And so I believe that the reason why, you might have remembered maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was this story out that we've run out of vaccines. My God, if you don't get your vaccine now, it's there's not going to be any left. I think that was just a ploy to enhance the value, because if there's scarcity, then value goes up and people act accordingly. And I think that was the reason why the people were hesitant to do it. The anti-vaxxers are a portion and are, on the government side, they're considered to be, maybe it's a conspiracy theory, they're considered to be the super spreaders because they're not getting vaccinated, and they are going to the lives, they're going to the parties, they're drinking and they're carousing and they're singing karaoke, and these are the people you have to watch out for. So yes, there is a long-winded answer, but I hope it responds, Ted. There are the anti-vaxxers here.
Can I say something here? Is it okay?
Maybe.
Maybe not. Okay, I'm gonna say it anyway if you say no. Okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Especially for the past month, I made an appointment with my doctor for my vaccine, and then I was supposed to get my second shot on August 1st. And then I got a phone call from my clinic, and then the doctor told me that there is not enough vaccine available right now, so I have to put on hold. And then I was waiting, I was on the waiting list, and I talked to many of my friends, and they were having the same problem. They had a vaccine coupon, and they tried to make an appointment, but they couldn't make any appointment because they simply didn't have enough vaccination. So I understand there is some kind of conspiracy theories here in Japan, but it's more like our government simply don't have enough vaccines back then. I don't know about right now, but that was the case about a month ago. So I hope this will change. People who wants to get vaccinated, I hope that they can get it. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay. So Japan has had so much vaccine stockpiled in storehouse. They had so much, they could even donate and contribute to Malaysia, to Vietnam, millions of doses. So if there is a shortage, it's only because the administration was not done well enough. Or, for example, Yamatoshi, which is just outside of, which is in Kanagawa-ken, they haven't even started sending out the postcards yet. And I think that is due to the administration. I think if they're participating in the distribution, the vaccines, the stockpile is there. If they have the nurses, if they have the machinery, the kuyakusho and the shiakusho, probably they don't. And probably the central government is saying, you have to handle that. We're not going to give you any money for doing that. And maybe that is an expression of why there's lagging administration. But I don't think it's because they don't have enough. I think it's just because of the logistics.
Now we've got also, sorry, we've got Ren here and also Cheryl invited to stage now. Ren.
Hi, Ren.
Hi, everyone. I just want to make a quick comment. I arrived in Taiwan 2 weeks ago, and I have been self-quarantined for 2 weeks in a hotel in Taiwan. In fact, today I'm able to check out. I just want to share with you that everything that I thought about what border control of making sure the foreigners entering a particular country is not going to affect or bringing in new virus and things like that. I thought I understood the complication of it. What I went through, at least in this country, Taiwan, it was just hugely complex, amazing. So my comment is, I just don't know how Japan was able to handle so many foreigners coming into Japan, and it's the amount of effort they have done. Certainly, I underestimated it. So there are two opinions. There could be two opinions on this. Japan was too reckless, or wow, Japan was able to do this despite of all these complexities to bring in foreigners into Japan. It can be positive, it can be negative. I don't know which one is correct, but what I can tell you is if anyone in this room thinking that a border control is just in making sure he's not infected, it is a lot more complex than that. And I have been through that for the last 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ren. I'm sure everybody in the United States is anxious for you to get back home so you can start driving the bus again.
Thank you.
I'll make a comment on what Ren mentioned just now regarding the inbound travelers to Japan. And after that, I will ask my questions, the question that I originally intended to ask.
Sure. Welcome to
So,
the room.
yeah, thank you. I came back to Tokyo in October last year. I was actually pretty surprised then that it was actually. So when I arrived at the Narita airport, they did a test. It was a saliva test. The result came back quite fast. I cleared it, and I actually arranged for my friend to pick me up from the airport. But what surprised me was when I came in, they actually told me that, oh, yeah, supposed to stay at home for 14 days for self-quarantine. However, you are allowed to go out for essential, like buying food, to run your important errands and stuff. But of course, I as a Singaporean, I'm quite well behaved, so I stay at home most of the time. And when I go out, I just quickly buy stuff and come back. In fact, I was ready to ask my friend to deliver things to me, but not knowing that they actually allow me to go out. So meaning to say that, well, Japan is actually pretty lenient in terms of their control. That's one. So the reason why I came out was because I'm not sure. Most of you are living in Japan, I assume.
Yes.
That's right.
Okay.
The majority.
Do you have difficulty booking for the vaccination?
Yes. Quite a few
Okay,
people
great.
do. Yes.
Great. So I do because I actually lived in Chuoku. Initially, I wasn't that rush. I didn't actually rush to try to get vaccinated because I was thinking I just let those people who need it more to go ahead first. So I'm from Chuoku. I live in Tsukiji. So they actually open their website once a week on Sunday to book, like today, this morning from 9 o'clock. I'm quite surprised. Within 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, everything is fully booked online and over the phone. You can't even get through the phone line. The thing that surprised me was they actually give priority for people going for second shot instead of people wanting the first shot. So that's the part that surprised me the most, because I was, like for other countries, when they distribute the vaccine, when they have, well, I heard Timothy saying that probably the issue, one of you mentioned that the issue is not with the that means with the amount of vaccine they have, it's more the distribution of the vaccine, right? Which I kind of agree, because I know that in certain countries, like I'm from Singapore, at the beginning when they don't have enough dosage, they actually spread out the first and the second shot to maybe 6-7 weeks rather than 4 weeks, until they catch up with the the vaccination rate. Then they kind of reduce the difference, the time taken between the first and the second shot. But I think in Japan, between the first and second shot is still 3-4 weeks. However, they are actually not trying to vaccinate more people on the first shot and yet giving priority to the people who are going for the second shot. This is the part that puzzles me, because if you actually allow more people to get the first shot, at least they get some degree of protection, and then catch up with the second shot, so that there'll be people who are fully vaccinated. And right now, I just read an article, they actually plan to do the third booster shot from next year onwards. So I'm thinking, okay, then how are they going to do this? Because they cannot even finish up people who want to get the first shot. To be honest with you, I wasn't that desperate at the beginning to want to. I'm still not desperate now, to be honest, to get my first shot, because I'm not traveling and I don't really have to go into crowded situation, because I can fortunately work from home. But how about those people who really need it? I'm just wondering, yeah.
to kind of want to hear your experience on stage. Sorry, I just joined the room, so I don't know what was discussed before I came in.
No, it
Thank you.
wasn't. And I think that the logic, the rationale behind that is that they prioritized people over 60 years of age. And that was, the priority for the government was to vaccinate them fully. To give them the 2 shots so that, the people who are most at risk get the protection they need.
Okay. According to the timeline that I received from my Kuyakusho, because I'm from Chuoku, right? They have already prioritized that already. Because actually, as of now, I guess the reason why the numbers are getting more and more is because they already open it up for most people who in terms of the age. So that's the reason why the pool is even bigger now. So when you try to book online, I don't think they ask you for the age anymore, other than the fact that your password is related to your age, your birth date. But I don't know, because okay, based on what I see from other countries, there is really no need to finish the first shot and the second shot within 4 weeks. So they can actually stretch it so that they can accommodate more people on the first shot, so that those people getting the first shot can actually go up. I mean, I'm not sure, because I didn't really thought about this until very recently, because in fact, only until yesterday, because Singapore allowed those people on double vaccinated to go in without quarantine. So that's when I started to look at it, because before that I have no real need to want to get vaccinated so soon. If a lot of people are rushing for it, I let them go ahead first, because I'm sure they need it more than me. So that was my mentality. But I just realized that it is actually not so. It is still quite difficult to book. So I have no idea what's going on in the other ward office if you are living in Tokyo.
Cheryl, I think the issue here is that the people always talk about the evidence from the scientific side, right? And in Japan, we haven't done any medical trials, clinical trials for the first shot and second shot should be more over for 3-4 weeks. So we don't have the evidence according to the doctors association nor those public office people. That's why they are always try to keep on time rather than giving the first shot for everybody. I know that your feelings, because I've been having a big issue to book my own shot. Although I'm living in Chiba Prefecture, so the situation might be different. But the problem is that I think the Pfizer Novartis, I can't remember the other one. Moderna. BioNTech. Moderna. Sorry. They haven't, I think, given the Japanese government evidence that the shot can be done over 4-5 weeks. And I think the one in Tokyo and one in Osaka, the big big thingy, they had issue for the giving the vaccination within the certain amount of time. That's why some Japanese are also very angry that they thought their second shot should be given exactly 4 weeks later from the first shot. So I think that's kind of the not really I don't the improvised situation is not really good for Japanese people. So if the government have been receiving the very good scientific evidence from those two companies, things might be different. I'm done speaking.
Thank you, Tomoko. Yeah. Well, we were talking about so many things in this part, especially like Ted brought up about the anti-vaxxers. You remember when COVID first started to come out and become really a big issue, everybody said, well, because it survives so well in the cold, just wait for it to become summer and it'll be much better because it can't live in the heat, That causes people, these mixed signals, like Maya was saying, the mixed signals and the confusion, it really doesn't, it's not a good recipe for the rest of society, especially if you're going into an election cycle. So let me briefly go through what else I have. I have like 5 or 6 other things, but let me just encapsulate them by mentioning, the economy. We escaped being in a depression. So a depression is 2 consecutive quarters where the GDP is not in a positive motion. Last quarter, it was in a negative, and this quarter, they squeaked through by several um, decimal points. That's not 1%, it's like less than 1%. They squeaked through. So we are not in a depression. The Japanese economy is not qualified as in the depression state. So everybody can clap hands because we missed that bullet. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to get hammered in the next quarter. But even though we're going to get hammered in the next quarter, it's not going to be a consecutive one. So Japan escapes being characterized as a country that's in a depression. Okay? If you're looking at how things are handled in Japan and the supply chain and the impact that that's having on the economy. I mean, Toyota just announced, my gosh, Toyota just announced that they have to cut production. They've got 14 plants, 21 lines in Japan. They supply the Japanese market, but they also export. And among all things that Japan exports, automobile production is by far the engine of economic development for this country, all of the downstream production. They're going to cut in September about 40% of their production. And it is not just because they can't get the chips and the devices that require high technology capacitors, but it's also because COVID has hit them, and you can't, if you're building cars, you can't work from home very easily. So they're taking a big hit there. And like I said earlier, there are changes that are going to come up that are going to be of a magnitude different than what we have been accustomed to. And so Toyota production going down 40% in September to increase in November, December to meet pent-up demand. That is the projection now. You stay tuned to this room next week, and there might be something quite different. The amount of supply chain disruption that is occurring is not just in chips and condensers and the high tech, but I don't know if you're following this very much, but the shipping, the people who are on ships who are bringing containers into ports all over the world, COVID has run rampant on the ships. So you might have somebody who is on the ship. You've got 30 people who man the ship or around that number for any of these container ships, these large ships that are dealing with trade, not just, oil containers. I'm talking about, containers that bring in goods and products. They're locked in harbor because they can't unload their cargo. That's happening throughout harbors all over the world, and that is going to cause huge disruption. When there is tightened supply, demand shoots up, and that means costs shoot up. There was a front page piece a couple of days ago in one of the newspapers that Japan has escaped inflation. The Bank of Japan under Mr. Kuroda has been trying hard to have inflation about 2% of the economy to keep having a bit of inflation is good for the economy. He hasn't been successful there. He's got an easy money policy, and the price for goods and services has not significantly increased, even though the costs of input have increased. So the important part here is that in the United States, inflation is about 5.4%, and it is going to increase with the new Biden proposal of spending billions on the new Green Deal and supply chain and social services. Even in the EU, inflation is at about 2.2%. It was predicted to be 2%, so it exceeded expectations. So that means prices are increasing, prices of goods. The Japanese have been able to keep prices stable, which means that corporations who are producing goods and services are reluctant to pass these costs on to consumers. That means that the coffers that they've been developing, the war chests of money that they've accumulated, they've put money into stock markets, safe investments, so that the money is available, but it's churning a profit for them, even though they're not using it, is being brought down because they're reluctant for whatever political purposes, because the Japanese government has told them, or just because the Japanese consumers react very, very overboard when there is a price increase. Similarly, there's no increase in the price of labor. The wages have remained flat. So we're in this kind of holding pattern that just is somewhat untenable. Something's got to break at some point in time. And a lot of the things that we're talking about in this room are also somewhat in that situation where it's an unnatural situation. It's being propped up by a lot of different factors that don't quite make sense. And just the natural order of things will create a pressure at some point, and then it breaks. And when it breaks, then things begin to tumble. And we're in that situation in a lot of different areas, not just the economy, not just with COVID, not just with Afghanistan, with a lot of different things. Another report that came out just this last week is that the Japanese parliament has decided to increase the budget for defense spending. This is an enormous amount of money. They've increased it pretty significantly. It's a proposal that they're considering now, that they've already said this is not a ceiling. This is a basement for the increase, and we will pass the budget for the defense in December. So between now and December, there will be more discussions on that. The last time, so in this budget proposal, defense spending will exceed 1% of the GDP. No big deal. But the policy has been that we will not exceed 1% of the GDP in defense spending. For a company or a country like Japan, the number 3 economy in the world, that 1% is an enormous amount of money. So there's a lot you can do with it. However, this has never happened in post-war Japanese economy. The only time that it kind of came close was that in 2010, because of the financial crisis, Japanese GDP shrunk, thereby making the amount of money that was already locked in for defense spending to exceed the 1% figure. But that was just a kind of technical thing. Right now, there is a drive to research and development, AI, unmanned aircraft, laser and microwave, to shoot down missiles that are coming in. They are on a roll. One of the other things that they, when you buy a system from the United States, for example, the F-1 fighters, or the Aegis missile system, it's usually a 12-year commitment. It's parts and services. It's a lot of things. So it's a very big ticket item. With what's going on in Afghanistan, just to shift a little bit, it is not untoward of the Japanese to look at what's going on there and thinking, is this partner a good partner for us? I mean, I've heard that for many, many years. We love the umbrella that the American military provides to us, but is it reliable? And that reliability has come into question yet again, much to the damage of the United States and the people who work in the State Department and in the Defense Ministry. And the relationship between the United States and Japan is very, very important strategically and socially and technically and just economically. It's a very rich and important bilateral relationship. It is being tested, and after the administration of Mr. Abe, who was always for exceeding the budget and always for revising the Constitution so that Japan can project its power militarily, that looks to be an option whose time is coming, whether we want it or not. So it's something that we need to keep an eye on. It's probably an inevitability due to what's going on in Taiwan and in Hong Kong. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Hong Kong and Taiwan. There's plenty to talk about there, but I just don't have the time. Hong Kong is under an increasingly severe crackdown. People are leaving Hong Kong in droves. Ever since, in fact, the new law on state security was passed, I think when was that? Maybe in June. The number of people who have fled Hong Kong is pretty astounding. Finally, Kamala Harris is in this region today. She's visiting Singapore and Vietnam. Maybe a 2-day trip, to get out of the hot seat and to, supplement her profile as vice president and increase her diplomatic skills, hopefully. But it's also a great time not to be in Washington, D.C. There is enormous turmoil going on in Washington, D.C., not just at the White House level, but also things that are going on in Chicago and in just in D.C. There was 21 people killed in I think a barbecue or a wedding or something like that. All blacks that were gunned down by gun violence and mass murder. That's in the nation's capital. Things are going on there and in Portland, in Seattle. There's just a lot of turmoil that's going on in the United States. So it's a good time for the vice president to be someplace else, but she does have to go back to Washington, D.C. And when she's in Vietnam, she will be making a press conference where she will be picking up questions. I think that will be tomorrow, and it'll be interesting how she addresses those. And finally, Motegi, who is the foreign minister, is on a 10-day trip, not for the same reason that Kamala Harris is on her trip. He left a week ago today, and he's visiting 7 countries, including Palestine, Israel, Iran. Where else is he? Iraq, Egypt. He's making the rounds, and that is not specifically due to what happened in Afghanistan, but it is supplementing, the urgency of his trip, and also burnishes his issue very nicely for the upcoming election of lower house members. He's a lower house member, and also for potential replacement of the current prime minister. With that, I am at 10:32. Maya, my apologies. And I'd like to close up my comments and then open the room. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating.
Please, may I have one quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Can you please share your what you foresee for the after the Afghanistan fall down and the Taiwan? I'm very much worried about what's happening in Taiwan in the future because in Olympic Games, the United States got the most medals, right? But on the same day, Chinese government claims that China won more medals because they're including the Taiwan and Hong Kong's. That's very behind that. I think that China has an intention to take Taiwan and Hong Kong in the near
Yep.
future. So I foresee the tension in the Taiwan Straits. So I'd like to hear your comments on this.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if I captured the entire question. What did it have to do with the Olympics, or was it just the tension between Taiwan and the rest of the Asia Pacific region?
Right. Oh,
okay.
The reason why I take the medal number of the medal, for example, is China tried to include the Taiwan and Hong Kong for their entire medals because U.S. won 38 gold and China 39, and China got 38. So we believe USA got the number 1 medal country, but the Chinese says no, we should include Taiwan and Hong Kong. That means 42 medals.
So
Timothy, this is Ren.
Go ahead, Ren.
Oh, so just quickly, I think I remember during the earthquake in Fukushima, Taiwan donated more money to Japan, but the Chinese government says no, it's China because Taiwan is part of China. So Taiwan's donation should be counted toward China's donation to Japan. I think that's the same point Hiroaki was trying to make.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. I think most people listen to that and they just kind of laugh because it's this need to be recognized, this desire to be on top. You know, there are so many wonderful things about China. They do some things just so well, and running an economy under their style of government is it's a lot easier in many respects than having a capitalist system run a society. But it's the quality of the society that you end up with. So this please look at me, please look at me. People, I think, are getting tired of that. But all it requires is somebody to say, well, we're going to open up a trade delegation office in Taipei, and we're going to call it Taipei, not Taiwan, or we're going to recognize Taipei as just tweaking their nose right back. This battle of words is the precursor to a more kinetic kind of action that it looks like it's building up to. And I think just to respond to the question from my own perspective, Hiroaki, the United States and all of the countries in this region are just struggling for status quo, maintain status quo. Don't allow the man-made islands to be, stationary aircraft carriers. Do not allow the incursion to continue over Taiwanese airspace. Keep things calm. Increase the level of deterrence that the Chinese would suffer from in the event of an incursion on Taiwan. I don't know, depending on who you talk to, that incursion is inevitable at some point in time. So how do you make it a less favorable outcome than all of the other wonderful things that are going to happen if the status quo and peace in the region is maintained? So I think that's the struggle that we're all confronting now. And it's like we talk on this room, everything is political, everything has an impact. And similarly with geopolitics and with Taiwan, everything has an impact, everything means something. And we're in the middle of just a huge, I don't like the term paradigm shift, but a huge change that is going to affect a lot of people, and how we deal with it and how we accommodate it is really going to determine the prosperity of this region. This is the most growing region in the world. It's not the one that is the most fraught with geopolitical tension. I think that's now the Middle East, but it could very easily become that focal point. Yeah, thank you.
Timothy, I've got the question about Afghanistan issue. Actually, two questions. One is, do you think Japanese government will accept any refugees from the Afghan? And second question is that I read an article stating that the American government is actually asking Japanese defense force to send over to help the evacuation of Afghani who helped allies. Do you think Japanese government is going to send any aircraft from the defense force to help Americans, as America is actually asking us, like showing flag kind of things?
Okay, great question, Tomoko, but I can't answer unless you tell me that your head is covered with a scarf or something.
Okay. But actually, do you think Japanese government, rather than sending any aircraft or anything, that's
No.
really still under table negotiation, so we can't say anything right now. But do you think Japanese government is accepting any refugees from Afghan? Because Japan is not well-known place to be welcoming any refugees anyway.
Okay, so it's a complex question. First of all, they did accept on refugee status the soccer player from Myanmar. You might have read that. I don't know what his religious background is, but the Japanese government did extend refugee status to him. With those coming out of Afghanistan, I would say probably on a humanitarian basis, they might accept dozens, but these are almost all by basically by definition Muslims. So I don't know if the policy with regard to that is as flexible as it would be with anybody else. But I think that the Japanese don't want to be that involved in that. That was not of their creation. Even the British are saying, the Americans, you screwed this thing up, and now we have to evacuate our people. We have a different gate and a different security at the Kabul airport, but we're not rescuing your guys. We're going out rescuing our guys. And in fact, they're doing that. The British special forces are securing British nationals, and the Americans are kind of at a deficit there. I can't envision that the Japanese self-defense forces would go to Kabul to assist or to facilitate, because they would just be such a ripe target. Japan has low tolerance for kidnapping or death of their nationals, so I think that would be an invitation that would not be welcome in the international community, particularly here in Japan. And sending flights over for example, military transport to pick up. I don't think there are as many people that would be demanding that as there are the British and Australians. There are a lot of Australians there, and the Americans. When the United States received approval to invade Afghanistan, they had an agreement among the EU countries. If one of us is attacked, all of us is attacked. Aren't we in this together? And we've got to get Bin Laden, and we have to do this as a group. And they did that. The United States did that. And then this mission creep occurred, and we have this thing with Saddam Hussein, and we have to invade them now, and we have this yellow cake. And this has all turned out to be a farce, but everybody was pulled in that direction too. So there's a lot of bitterness among U.S. allies. And in fact, I think we haven't seen the worst of this thing to unroll. I think these next 2 weeks are going to be very, very delicate. Mr. Biden has said we're going to be finished by 9/11, the anniversary of the Twin Towers attack. And so, as far as the United States is concerned, that was their withdrawal. There are other coalition partners that are in there too. They weren't confided in. They weren't involved in this decision, and they're scrambling to pick up the pieces as it's crumbling too. So I don't think there's a lot of goodwill generated right now. And with the Japanese, the Japanese are, the affinity with Japan and the United States is very close. The Japanese weren't involved in the military part of what was going on in Afghanistan. So I think they probably have a better chance at having good relationships with the new government there, but they got the hell out of town too. So the embassy there is vacant. So it's anyone's guess. Maybe we can revisit that next week. Next week will be, today is the 22nd. We will still be in August. We won't be in September yet, but a lot of things are going to happen in September. September is going to be a very active time.
Yes,
Hi,
Hayato.
can I go here?
Go ahead, Hayato. We've been all waiting. Everybody here on the room has been waiting.
Oh, no, it's not. Thank you very much. But here's what kind of I kind of see in what happened in Afghanistan, and why it's so important to everybody in Asia. There's a couple reasons, right? What happened in Afghanistan could happen to Taiwan and Japan and Korea and South Korea, right? Meaning that what happened in Afghanistan once U.S. put out, and the local, the military just run away. So like I kind of gave up the whole country without a single bullet, right? And that happened. That's not happened to, could happen to Korea. That could happen to Japan. That could happen to South Korea. The reason I say this is because I was part of this. We did this negotiation of the handover of Taiwan to the mainland China like several years ago. So this kind of a discussion has taken place. Now it may be held up, but we're going to go back and do it again, right? Yeah. So like I don't think that's what happened in Afghanistan and we are safe in Japan or Korea. That's not the case at all, right? Because U.S. was going to ready to give up the Taiwan once, right, several years ago. So they may come back again, right? So that's one. two is what we have learned, we're learning right now is after the U.S. kind of pulled out, the Afghan has this lithium, that's going to, so if the China is going to take the lithium that's in Afghanistan currently, China is going to own 85% to 95% of global lithium supply, right? And lithium is kind of a core mineral that's going to be required to make us like the carbon, meaning so the electric car, mobile phone, and all this battery require the lithium, right? So like a U.S. just like passed the bill to try to make the U.S. say like to be more like a carbon free, but they cannot do it without this. If the China is going to take the lithium supply in Afghanistan, and they're going to dominate the market, right? So for that, U.S. has no choice except to do the two things, right? Or three things. One is that they have to share, this lithium with China and Russia. That's one. And China and Russia try not to share, obviously, right? Because they got to dominate. Then the second one is the U.S. have to go into the war, right, to try to capture the lithium, right? Yeah, because otherwise, everybody else is going to get flight up. There's no more electric car, no more mobile phone, and anything else like that. Well, U.S. is going to do another like a Taliban, like U.S. did the Taliban, U.S. did the Islam states. So we're going to go and send this guerrilla again, right? Yeah, so we end up doing the same thing the U.S. has already done, or has been doing over and over again, and put the Afghanistan back to where it has been again, right? Yeah, so that's kind of seeing what's going to happen to Afghanistan. Then coming to this, to what the U.S. is going to be ready to go into the war, the other one is obviously if the China is going to do the blockade over Persian Gulf, that's going to cut off all the oil supply to say Japan, right, and Korean or this country, right? So the China has been working on it. That was a part of the commercial treaty. So the U.S. has been kind of slow to lift the sanction, but if the U.S. does not lift the sanction enough, the Persian Gulf will be closed by the Chinese Navy, and that's coming, right? Yeah. So if that happens, so we have no choice but to go to another kind of Cuban crisis we had with the JFK a long time ago, right? Then also the lithium, like if the Afghan, Taliban took the control in Afghan, but if the China and Russia would not share any of this lithium, and we have no chance but to go back in and try to take it one or another, right? And the third one that I kind of mentioned was before was U.S. auto generals, they always say the same thing always, which is that what makes the U.S. what it is today is the dominance in a key currency, where the U.S. dollar is a key currency, right? So we have 5 governments or countries who are not U.S. dollar kind of like as a kind of dominant currency, which are Russia, China, like Iran, Iraq, and Libya, right? And look what happened to Libya. Look what happened to Iraq, right? And Iran is going to now probably go back, right? Yeah. So now we have Russia has a GDP equivalent of Tokyo, so it's not the real enemy, So then China is the only enemy left. So that's the last point. I apologize for taking so much time here. Is kind of military spending, right? Which is so U.S. spend about $700 to $800 billion a year, which is 3.4% GDP. China spent probably $300 billion plus, which is about 2% GDP in China, right? So, but Japan, like Timothy mentioned earlier, they try to spend about $60 billion about, which is like you mentioned, like 1%, like 0.9% to 1%, right? And Korea spent $50 billion, 1.8%, and Taiwan spent $15 billion, which is 2.2%, right? So combined with them, it's like $125 billion. And that's not going to be enough, right? Yeah, because China spends twice as much every year, right? So for that, like Japan, Korea, and Taiwan has no choice except to just double all this, right? And maybe a lot more, just to keep the peace as is. Otherwise, we don't have any China, Taiwan, and Korea in the next 5-10 years. So that's I'm done talking. That's how I see it. Sorry.
And Timothy, can I have 30 seconds response to Hayato before asking Neil to wait for me, if it's possible?
Sure, you can have actually 35.
Okay, Thank you. Because I'm in Taiwan for the last 2 weeks, I have been watching the news, local news from Taiwan. About Hayato, about your comment about Taiwan will be the next Afghanistan. I can share with you that what the local news in Taiwan was saying, that they understand a famous phrase better than anyone on earth. I think the phrase is, God helps those who help themselves. In other words, the huge difference between Taiwan and Afghanistan is Taiwan's government is really trying to help Taiwan, while the president, he's the first one to flee. So what Taiwan's people I see on the news is they said the only way to better get more help from the friends around the world to help Taiwan is show Taiwan's self-defense commitment. Otherwise, why should people help you if you're not trying to help yourself? So they are doing that. And then the second point is, this is going to be sarcastic, but the Chinese communist government has been keeping on sending a lot of propaganda to Taiwan that, hey, you will be the next Afghanistan. And the more I watch them saying this, I almost wish to convey my congratulations to China for upgrading themselves to Taliban status. That's my last point. Okay, thank you.
If I can ask a quick question, also Taiwan related. There's a theory going around that if China were to try and take Taiwan, that it wouldn't necessarily be the tanks and the planes and the ships that people imagine, but it would tend to be almost similar to Hong Kong. Of course, we're talking
It's
about
easier. There's an easier way. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And so if we're talking about that type of narrative, whether, that's a multi-pronged approach through commercial, economic means, information means, cyber warfare, etc., what is the implication for Japan between those two routes, the one being the military, the other being is through the multi-pronged non-kinetic approach? And what would be the impact or implications for Japanese politics? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nell. And also, I very much like Ren's last comment, too. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, Taiwan is critically important because of the shipping lane and because it is a somewhat neutral player, very friendly terms with Japan and the United States, and a counterbalance to what China wants to do. But I think everybody agrees if China wants to do it, it can do it, because as Hayato said, just the comparison of how much military might that they can pour onto achieving that objective far surpasses anything that a collection can do in response to that. And even the war games have kind of proven that out. So the better way is, and it kind of fits the Chinese typical philosophy, is you don't have to do it with a kinetic action. It doesn't need to happen this week or tomorrow. We can take the long, slow approach, and blockades or just restricting their ability to trade or participate, just like they've done with Hong Kong. Very slow, very methodic, very making everybody else mad. But what are you going to do about it, right? So the other repercussions that come out of that, for example, in Hong Kong, the people with the money and who are running the businesses are fleeing. They're going to Singapore, they're going to Taiwan, they're going to Japan, they're going to the United States, they're going to Britain. Maybe the idea is that after the Chinese finish that, just the entire world coalesces, and it's just a dividing line. Hong Kong is no longer participating in the world economy as it initially did. But I don't know. It's far too speculative.
Hi, can I respond to a couple of those comments?
Please go ahead.
All right. So first I got to Ren, right? So I was not saying that that Taiwan is next, right? Because right now United States wanted very much to go into the war with China, right? I mean, U.S. is dying to go into China, right? Since 2012. That's why we had this Senkaku Island, the whole thing. right? Because we just want to get the China out so that we can go and fight. But China has not been, but maybe like soon, right? So because like U.S. has an agenda that for the U.S. to stay what the United States is, the globally the globe has to be U.S. dollar dominated, the world, right? So the only thing that will challenge today is the U.S. dominance in China. So for that, so before, the U.S. was ready to let Taiwan go, right? But like several years ago, but now like they have an interest right now, as you can tell, that U.S. really want to engage with China, right? Yeah. So for that, like Ren's assessment was kind of the getting back to that one was U.S. has an agenda that would change based on the priority at a given time, right? So that's a comment. And regarding what the question to the the Japan, it will be really kind of tremendous because now like that China is going to come to the like a border, right? And we're going to see the actual takeover one way or another, right? All this economic takeover that we are seeing in Hong Kong, and potential see in Taiwan. That's a negotiation that we have had actually, right? Yeah, because it was a 50-year term, right? Yeah, so Hong Kong is a 50-year term. It started in 1998, 1999, right? And that's 23 years or so. So now like we are half into the 50 year because before Hong Kong becomes like Red China, right? So for that, like as we always see, China took over, full control on their Democratic Party and everything else, and they're going to make it into another city in China within the next 25 years. Like that was what's being planned and agreed, right? So for that one, about 50 years, and it was the kind of same agenda that we have had in Taiwan, right? But it kind of is held up now, right? Because now the U.S. has interest. We wanted China to come out and ideally to the naval battle, right? Because the China has never fought a naval battle, right? So the U.S., Japan, we have like a supremacy in a naval battle. So we'd rather fight in Taiwan than in Korea, where we had to fight with China in 1950 against those huge, Chinese army. Yeah. So for that. But let's hope that this thing does not happen. But in the meantime, that could happen. Yeah. So for that, we kind of just relax and think that it's happened in Afghanistan. Will never happen in Taiwan. And also, if we understand those sentiment in Taiwan too, then my challenge there is not my challenge. Our challenge is so we had those military aid, right? So then with the local soldiers, are they going to fight? That's the question, right? Because if the Chinese going to come in a military invasion to Taiwan, right? And we have they're going to come in 500,000 to 1 million soldiers, landing the beach in China, in Taiwan, right? Taiwan has 50,000 soldiers. Are they going to fight against 1 million soldiers, right? Yeah, and in the plus, the U.S. has 50,000 submarine in Okinawa. We're going to airlift the same day in a fight with this Taiwanese at the beach in Taiwan. If that happens today, right? We're going to airlift and fight. But the question is that the local people, have to be prepared to fight. So for that, I guess we kind of need the additional training to get ready for that kind of fight. Yeah, so I'm done talking. Thank you.
Yeah, Hayato, just quickly, what would you recommend to our friends in Taiwan to gain further support from their friends around the world to help Taiwan besides what they are doing now, which is to show to the world that they are taking good care of their own people, they are committed to defend their own island?
Oh, okay. I mean, it kind of is easy to me. One is that they have to increase the military spending first, right? And I'm sure they are doing that, right? Because they had no other choice. Then again, they just have to lobby a little bit harder than they have been doing so that they get those support, right? Because remember, U.S. is a democratic country, right? Yeah, so they are free to lobby, to the government to get those support. That's how everything kind of works, right? And we kind of spoke, as to why does the Taiwanese semiconductor factory end up in Arizona, right? And where the Sandy McCain's district is, right? Yeah,
Right.
so that's how the world works in reality.
Right.
So
Right.
So
I was just trying to pick your brain because you are so knowledgeable. I was wondering if you know something else that Taiwan could do to gain more support.
yeah, best thing is I guess that they will invest to lobby, right? Because all this U.S. All the politicians, leaders, therefore higher, So why not, right?
Yeah.
That's
Thank
same
you.
too for Japan too, and Korea too.
Thank you, Hayato. It's always good to get your evaluation, your assessment. I'm very hopeful that it doesn't turn into the first scenario that Nell was talking about, some sort of kinetic action. But, all of the things that we're talking about on this room point to a strain and a stress on a lot of different areas of society and politics and economy. And in the past, it has been a viable option in that kind of a scenario to go to war, because war is good for the economy. It helps. It brings the people together, and it steels people's resolve to act as a nation, especially when they're in a financial depression, or they're not able to do the things that they want to do. It used to be they couldn't get the oil, so of course we're going to attack Pearl Harbor. Currently, if we can't get the lithium, and it turns out to be one of the strategic inputs to the economy, and it's being hoarded by one country, the best way to achieve that is just to address it frontally. So I think about this, and I talk about this with people who are in the know all the time, and it does seem to many people to be an inevitable outcome, because the vectors are all pointing in that direction, not in the direction that we're going to be able to achieve status quo, and the Chinese are going to see that it's not in their best interest to unify Taiwan as they've done with Hong Kong. I think they're committed to achieving that, and under the current president, they're likely to do that. Then again, there could be internal disruption that is caused, or the other thing is this
Timothy,
coalition of the entire world that says, we now have evidence that COVID started. It was designed. You guys are the source of this, and we're all mad at you. That's also a scenario that it could, create a huge divide, and then all the trade barriers go up, and it's us against them.
Timothy, can I make a comment on Rand's question just now?
Yes, please, Cheryl.
Okay, I think he was mentioning about how Taiwan can show the world that they're committed to defend Taiwan. Is that correct?
Yes, and also what else they can do to get more support, if you have an idea to share.
I have one idea that I want to bring up for thoughts, because I actually went to some Chinese speaking room where the Taiwanese are. So I actually asked them, are you okay? Well, there was a room that they discussed, whether America is reliable to back them up, right? In times in the event that there is there's a situation going on between them and China. But what I told them is Taiwan can only be defended by Taiwanese. We cannot rely. I mean, they cannot rely on America, and they cannot rely on Japan. Which is true, but I think talk is cheap, but action counts. If I'm aware, most of those Taiwanese who are able and have rich enough, they usually have double citizenship. What does this show? This show that in the event of something happen, they can always jump ship, which is not very reflective of their passion to want to protect Taiwan. So to be honest, I think I still go back to the same point. If they want to defend Taiwan, they have to defend, first of all, want to defend it themselves first. I think the Taliban and in the Afghanistan situation is, although the Afghan army have 350,000 strength compared to, I think, only 60,000+ from Taliban, but they decide to give up and not to fight. So if you don't fight for your own land, how can you expect others to do it for you? So that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
I personally 100% agree with Cheryl. Yes, it's the same for Japan too.
Oh, I also agree, because when this enemy shows up on the beach, a long time ago when we have the Okinawa has a war with the United States, all this was, people locally, they fought physically, and a lot of people die for it, right? It was a really painful experience for the U.S. also, because everybody's really dying, to defend, and a lot of deaths, So that's kind of my kind of question or suggestion I had, which was, would that so if the enemy shows up in the beach, right, in the Taiwan, would the Taiwanese go to the beach prepare to defend the country, right? So that one, I'm not sure, and I don't think those guys are trained for, right? So that's what I mentioned, that, those are the Japanese Defense Force, Taiwanese, we have to put those guys on that training, so they'll be prepared to fight like Rambo, right? So we do have a United States have developed those kind of military program already, right? For those typical reserve for the special forces, they go through this mental training, and those guys become like a crazy fighting machine, right? But we're going to need this, right? So that's kind of my point, So the Taiwanese have to try to defend their own country, Japanese have to defend, the Koreans have to defend, right? They cannot just expect for others to fight and sit in the back, which may be the case for many, particularly Japan, right? Yeah, we think the U.S. is going to go and fight and lose like 1 million lives, so where they are just doing nothing, and behind the U.S. And that's not going to be the case. So that's also a kind of conversation I'm having with our political leaders too, right? I'm done talking.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the face of war has changed. I don't think it's going to be people showing up on the beaches. I don't think that's the way it's going to happen. I think it's more like Nell was suggesting, the second alternative, a slow crouching incursion, one thing falling after the other. It kills less people, it takes more time, probably it's more effective. I mean, look what the Taliban was able to do in a 20-year period, against a far more superior force. It just, I think, we're kind of unprepared to consider what it will actually be, but I think we can anticipate that it's going to be, if it's kinetic, it's going to be very swift, it's going to be dramatic, and it's going to be kind of game over before much else starts. I mean, that's the technology of war these days.
As a quick question, is Japan considering the option of a slow Chinese encroachment, step-by-step approach with Taiwan, in terms of their planning and contingencies in the long term, as much as they might look at a scenario of China, bringing in their ships and guns? Thank you.
Yeah, I think from the Japanese perspective, maybe this is overstating. I think anything is better than putting their own soldiers and their own citizens in harm's way, which means putting bayonets on guns and sending Japanese soldiers into. I mean, even as a peacekeeping force, somebody mentioned earlier, I forget who it was, about sending in self-defense forces into Kabul to achieve some sort of a joint objective. That's just not going to happen. I think the military here would not do that, and the population would not. I mean, that would just be disastrous politically if there were Japanese forces who were kidnapped or held hostage. It just wouldn't work out. So you take that 3 or 4 notches up, and that's a lot, and get involved in kinetic activity in an organized way as a coalition partner with the United States and the British, and the everybody else. That's there are a lot of better ways that can roll out than the way it is kinetically.
But Japan is looking at both scenarios, not that they would go in, but that they imagine a future where China might go in kinetically versus China would go in step by step. So not saying that Japan would react, boots on the ground or something, but like they're planning, whether that's through economic strategies of, I don't know, diversification and strengthening ties with Taiwan, or other measures. Yeah, just curious. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't have insight. I don't have personal knowledge of what's going on inside the. This would probably be coming out of the Prime Minister's office, not so much the Defense Ministry, but I don't have personal knowledge of that. But there are two scenarios, and so you've got to imagine that they spend a lot of time preparing for either scenario. So if it's capitulation and making sure that we're still friends after you've done that, and that you're not, blockading all of the shipping lanes, and then we're stuck. The Chinese president said some really harsh things about using nuclear weapons against Japan, and then dividing it up into 4 different regions afterwards. I mean, that's a scary prospect too.
Alice?
Yeah, thank you very much for bringing me up on stage. I actually came towards the end of the conversation. So I've kind of got some of the gist about Taiwan and China-US relations. Regarding Taiwan, the way I see it currently is it's only a matter of time. China eventually will take the state or the island eventually. But I see it in a more hybrid and cyber warfare is the path that China will take in the first place, rather than the conventional sense of war. So that's the route that China would take, in my opinion. And given, as we see in the recent events, if you compare it to the Azerbaijan-Armenian war, you see how hybrid warfare and cyber warfare combined with the intelligence can actually make war shorter and more effective in their strategies of war. So I think a full-on conventional war with Taiwan by the Chinese is not a possibility, but a hybrid, a more intelligent warfare by the Chinese to eventually take over the state or the island is very much an inevitability. It's only a matter of time when the Chinese will execute that. And that's my humble opinion. I'll try next time to be on time and come and give my further analysis. But thank you for having me on stage.
Thank you very much. We'll hold you to that. If you're not there, then you go to demerit.
And Ted, what's your take on that?
Yeah, just to add to Tim's wonderful analysis, I think another thing that's going on is that Tokyo is trying to stave off Beijing's influence in the Middle East, and it is part of a shrewd effort on the part of Tokyo to maintain some influence. Japan just pledged to donate $300 million to Iraq just today in humanitarian assistance, and that's just one of many deals, humanitarian assistance deals that's striking in the region. Just pledged a lot of money to rebuild Gaza. So I think it's looking to preserve some influence, and it is in a competition with China in the Middle East.
Great insight. Thanks, Ted.
Can I jump in a minute?
Sure.
Okay, so Japan, and Iran, as you know, like Japan, Iran has a full embassy in Tokyo. So unlike the United States, where like Iran doesn't have an embassy in DC, Japan always maintain a full, very friendly relationship with Iran. Right? Yeah. So yeah, like it's in Minami Azabu, right? Yeah. So it's a very beautiful architectural piece, right? So even like after revolution, like the relationship was always very good and stable, meaning that Japan was bought Iranian oil, which is the best quality in the world. So for them, like for Japan, like and after this COVID, it's like a very friendly, the government or country for Japan to go and visit. And now, particularly now, the U.S. is getting ready to lift the sanctions, right? Yeah, so for that, Japan would like to be a part of the economic growth in Iran, which is the fifth largest country in the world, right? So that's one, right? So also like I'd like to add to the Neil's kind of interest in Japan. So which is this is very important, significant. So that currently Japan has this constitution, Article 9, that will prohibit any attack. Japan can defend from an attack. So this is going to be odd because So it's the Russian or Chinese. I mean, they can just organize a bomber and come to the top of the imperial palace in Japan or the Japanese Defense Ministry, more like escorted by the Japanese fighter, and they can just bomb the headquarters and wipe out Tokyo today. So that it's protected by Japanese constitution, right? Yeah. So there's a discussion that kind of should be changed. So that was kind of important. This the importance that Timothy earlier comes a discussion that Mr. Abe wanted to get 2/3 of the vote in the upper house and lower house of Japan, so that Japan has can revise the constitution to try to defend before this Chinese Russian just come and bomb the emperor. But they can do this today, because they're protected by the Japanese institution. So that's the kind of very strange system, right? So I'm done talking.
Thank you. Yeah, the Japanese constitution prevents them from having offensive capabilities, but sometimes if you have a weapon, it can be used offensively or defensively. But the argument here is that just for defensive capabilities, so to prevent any kind of incursion like that, I think that's where all of the emphasis is placed. And on the offensive capabilities, I think they just rely on the United States. And based on certain codified agreements between the United States and Japan, they come to the aid of or supply and logistics in the event of an attack on the United States. So that's how they cover their bases there.
I will say, have a great day, everybody. Enjoy the weekend, the beautiful weather. Stay safe. And also, please remember that we have this room every Sunday at
8:30.
8:30 from today. Yes, 8:30. So please join us again next week if you have. I wouldn't say 1 hour, maybe 2 or 3 hours available, to listen. Yes, to the discussion in the background. And that's it for today. See you next time.